Intel is doing the right thing. Quote, Intel learned a customer relations lesson and offered replacement processors to all who requested them when a flaw could have affected a minimal number of users was discovered in the chip. I'm just kidding. That's from 1993. They haven't learned anything. First of all, we've discovered that some Intel CPU configurations have a alien technology that allows them to cool below ambient. That's interesting because it's physically impossible. But we'll talk about that in our next Intel piece. Instead of helping its customers, Intel has, it seems, been focused on trying to get in front of the story as it develops. On July 23rd at 10 a.m. Eastern, we emailed Intel because we noticed that Intel had silently deleted its announcement of an AMA that it missed on the previous day. Intel acknowledged our question and never answered us. However, within 6 hours of us emailing them, the company posted publicly announcing the delay of the AMA. Intel took our question, didn't answer it, and publicly acted in a way that puts it in the best light possible and makes it look like it's taking accountability based on our questioning, but without engaging with us. When Intel became aware that we knew it was acknowledging the oxidation issue with inconsistent language, we noticed that it silently updated its Reddit post after we emailed the company and without telling us about the change to its public statements. Maybe it's a coincidence. Intel wouldn't support something shady and unethical.
Yeah, no, that's a no. And you've got to be collaborating with my company to get my free computers. Sponsored by Intel. Thanks, Intel.
Thanks, Steve.
In February, Intel noted that it was investigating, quote, unlocked desktop CPUs, very specific phrasing, limiting the list of impact to only about 14 K-SKU models across the 13th and 14th gen. In May, it expanded to blaming motherboards as well, and now it's expanding to be any desktop Raptor Lake CPUs with 65 watt or higher base power, which grows the defect list to nearly every desktop model. That would be about 30 SKUs of the 43 that we found. Intel has gone from implicating 32% of its models to nearly 70% in just a few months. Intel subreddit community moderators deleted a comment from a game developer facing hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages from Intel's mistake. We have the literal receipts because the comment was, quote, off topic, while the Intel subreddit moderator, who is also a Tom's Hardware reviewer, simultaneously allowed this off-topic comment from a tribalistic sycophant. Intel recently reportedly blocked a Twitter account of moderate following for reporting on Intel's failures, which will hide the account's replies and some related engagements on Twitter. After publicly getting called out, Intel undid the block. Intel omitted the oxidation admission in its Intel.com posts while being forced to address it in community posts off-site. The company told us it knew of the oxidation issue in at least 2023, yet its largest customers told us that they weren't informed until just a few months ago, meaning that Intel may have knowingly and opaquely sold inventory with a higher defect rate. But as of last night, right before Intel allowed 15 to 20,000 of its employees to find out they were getting laid off via conference call with investors,
we are targeting a headcount reduction of greater than 15% by the end of 2025, with the majority of this action completed by the end of this year.
The company rephrased the oxidation issue that it had already admitted to as manufacturing speculation, now saying that it was identified all the way back in 2022. Somehow, this is worse than what they had originally said because that's now 2 years of absolute silence. You know, we like charts here, so we charted Intel's public statements made of its own volition versus those made after Level 1 Techs and GN Media reports. Nothing says this company takes this seriously, like being demonstrably and publicly aware of an issue for at least 6 months before ramping it to hyperdrive and quadrupling 7 months of prior statements in just 1 week with a ramp that looks like it's trying to get in front of media reports. We think this is Intel's playbook. We even made a chart for our emails. The blue line shows our inquiries to Intel. The red line shows their responses to us, which contained actual answers, not just acknowledgments. And the yellow line shows Intel public statements that conveniently contained answers to questions we asked. And this is exactly why we didn't talk to them before our first report, because we suspected this is how they would act. But after we had already exposed the possibility of the oxidation issue, we knew there was no way they could hide from it. When we pressed the company to extend its support window and loosen its requirements, Intel instead suggested that its customers should just try to RMA their devices, and when the devices are rejected, try again, and then keep trying until the company might eventually do the right thing. And in case that was a fluke, they told The Verge the same thing. We told Intel that this was a terrible response, then they didn't respond to us, and they instead publicly changed their commitments to extend some warranties in what looks like clear damage control attempts at this point, and also doesn't even help people who don't have boxed processors, which is most of them. But Intel made one sneaky change. On July 26th, they said that for users who purchased boxed or tray processors to reach out to Intel customer support. However, just yesterday, Intel has changed that. They dropped the word tray. Intel isn't even consistent in its language, literally days apart, and that is a gigantic change to the meaning of those sentences. We brought you this huge research video with store.gamersnexus.net with our brand new red, green, and yellow high heat resistance project and soldering mats, joining the existing blue. We currently have a 10% off discount code. You can just type in THISISFINE at checkout to get 10% off any order on our store. Plus our freshly restocked copper-plated mule mugs containing a thermal conductivity formula. The mule mugs sold out within just weeks when we first launched them with our EK investigation, so if you've been waiting for them, they're back in stock with their hammered finish copper-plated surface and stainless steel base. Our brand new solder mats are the first time we're introducing alternative colors. We have a bright and vibrant red with the same thick silicone as the original blue, a bright green, and a yellow project mat on the store. Internally, we use colors like these to differentiate different work areas. These mats are perfect for soldering, but even work well for model building, art projects, Lego building, or anything where you might want organizational boundaries and driver holders. We didn't buy many of the alternative colors because this is just a test launch for us. We've never tried this before, so if you really want one, make sure to buy one soon. If they do well, we'll order more of them. Click the link below. Let's start with Intel's most recent changes from last night, and then we'll go back to 2022 and work our way forward. Intel stock just saw the largest plunge in 50 years. The earnings call last night saw a shedding of $35 billion in market capitalization. That's according to Reuters report, and Intel excitedly announced that it'd be chopping some wood, by which it means people.
We have a lot of wood to chop.
Intel says it needs to immediately shed $10 billion of cost, and to do that, it's cutting approximately 12,000 jobs in its non-fab positions, according to our sources, with approximately 3,000 in its manufacturing part of the business. We've heard other estimates as high as 19,000 employees total getting cut. The company is also stopping its dividend, which is likely what drove investors away. A viewer also sent us this image from the internal all-hands call, allegedly immediately after earnings. Intel announced layoffs to employees on the investor call, and then it held an all-hands for employees where it announced it's also moving its sabbatical program to a use-it-or-lose-it model, stretching the time window, is cutting its use of its Intel corporate jet for the groups of employees that transit between campuses, and is eliminating cell phone reimbursement and fitness coaching. Intel knows it's going to have a hard time keeping employees motivated and salvaging morale, so it twisted the dagger in its desperate attempt to save $10 billion ASAP by eliminating the free fruit and seltzer water offered at the campuses. Here's what I don't understand. Cutting the fruit? You just got a 15% discount on all the free fruit and all the beverages, but getting rid of the people. So it's like 85% of the cost it used to be. Is that not enough savings already? So we asked Intel, the company with $53 billion of revenue in 2023, how cutting the fruit costs from employee benefits compared to things like salaries or private jets could possibly help. And the company sent this in response.
I mean, it's one banana, Michael. What could it cost? $10?
You've never actually set foot in a supermarket, have you?
I don't have time for this.
As for CEO Pat Gelsinger,
Papa's here.
he previously received a 45% raise from a paltry and frankly embarrassing $11.61 million per year in 2022 to $16.86 in 2023. Tom's Hardware actually reported that Pat was making the least out of all the big three CEOs, which is just like, what are his friends going to think of him?
We do not take this lightly, and we have carefully considered the impact this will have on the Intel family. These are hard but necessary decisions.
It's just, guys, it's just been really hard for him these last couple weeks making these kinds of cuts to all the employees, and we hope Pat's okay. Intel absolutely is a bloated organization, but it was Intel that created this situation. It's Intel that hired all those people who built their plans around the company, and Intel is responsible for the mess it created, and that includes the mess it is now creating for its employees. And most recently, that mess has been encouraged by one buzzword.
I don't know if you heard about this thing called AI, the role of AI, just making it go faster.
Or maybe it's two buzzed letters, but either way, this is what Intel said in its earnings call of its favorite new thing.
Q2 profitability was below our expectations, due in part by our decision to more quickly ramp Core Ultra AI CPUs.
So Intel is effectively betting the entire company on this trend, and it is somehow one of the only big tech companies that is fad following that manages to lose such massive amounts of perceived market value while chasing the trend. The company is currently speedrunning a total loss of confidence. Enthusiasts who often act as halo marketing evangelists for small businesses making purchasing decisions of OEM systems, it is speedrunning the loss of confidence from the investors who have lost dividends. It is working on losing the confidence of employees who will struggle with morale. And even its fab isn't running smoothly. We had one Intel employee tell us that the fab has been running on a, quote, skeleton crew for quite some time now. Another source informed us that the manufacturing challenges allegedly persist even in spite of fixing the problem that Intel has been talking about previously. Many of these issues come down to pushing hot lots through the fab, and sometimes they can sit too long, where this potentially exposes them to via oxidation and other issues. And we're told that Intel has issues with its critical queue times for wafers, where work in progress inventory can effectively begin to sort of rot on the floor, as it were. But that's another story, and it's really not the biggest part of this, or at least hopefully for Intel it isn't. We'll see if that changes. As a backdrop to all of this chaos though, Intel has its Raptor Lake woes ongoing, and the company is now facing 2 class action litigators who are investigating whether they may want to open complaints against Intel. That's where we need to get back to the timeline of the Raptor Lake story. We'll look at that, how Intel has known about these problems, and we think it has failed to act on them, it has failed to adequately inform its customers, and it has embarrassed itself by changing as little as possible, as slowly as possible, until it eventually just gets a little bit of a change in the warranty policy in there to try and shut the loudest group up, enthusiasts, without actually meaningfully, we think, helping anybody or taking the responsibility and doing this right. Maybe they've decided that class actions will be cheaper at this point, but let's go through the timeline. For this research piece, we investigated Intel's timeline of failures for the 13th and 14th gen, going basically back to the beginning for the launch. The piece includes some fact-based research, including timelines, dates, and events and statements. It also includes some opinions and some subjective analysis where we interpret and look at why Intel might be doing certain things the way it is. Those will be opinions based on our interpretation of their events. And then additionally, our next piece will be looking at some testing data, our next piece with Intel anyway. So we'll start with the timeline in this one, and then we'll get into some of the, I think, terrible answers that Intel provided both to us and The Verge. So let's get started with November of 2022. In November of 2022, 2 years ago, a forum thread on Anantech stated this, quote, "I noticed some reports about degrading i9-13900K and KF processors. I experienced this problem myself, running at 60 GHz light load at acceptable temperature and non-extreme voltages." A user in that same thread also called out the Ring bus, a stark resemblance to last week's lead. The user said they couldn't run 5 GHz all-core stable at 1.2 volts, and then said maybe it was Ring at 5 GHz at 1.2 it could not handle. This old post is critical to establish that Intel couldn't have been unaware of these issues over the last 2 years. December 14th, 2022 is also interesting. There's an overclock.net post of the 0x104 microcode. It says, quote, 104 has some strange interaction with the core PLL voltage trim, which causes a very high temperature alert and strange core temperature deltas if you go past 30 millivolts. And at default setting, 0.9 causes core temperature to be reported at least 6 degrees Celsius below actual ambient temperature. This is something we actually looked into. We'll talk about that later. The user then speculates it may be due to issues with core PLL voltage trim. Digging for 0x105 microcode, we found this maybe damning EVGA forum post from February 16th, 2023, posted by a then EVGA employee. Quote, updates CPU microcode to 10E and provides microcode option 105. 105 version has lower VID value. That Intel was lowering the VID values as early as 18 months ago further supports the theory that Intel has known these issues for a long time and has been, in our opinions, attempting to make it go away silently. In April 2023, a user posted a huge troubleshooting thread detailing steps isolating a CPU fault. In July, the user edited their post and noted, quote, some of i9-13900 is faulty. It's like lottery. The user suggested downclocking to a 50x multiplier, and this likely would have been when Intel knew of these issues. But Intel chose to stay quiet. The company instead let its users suffer in silence as they spent weeks of time trying to identify if the fault was theirs, their motherboards, or their $400 CPUs. On July 4th of 2023, a user posted on the Asus forums noting that they had isolated a temperature increase of 20 degrees on their CPU following a microcode change. The user tried alternating microcode versions and confirmed this. This could indicate either an Asus or Intel attempt at reducing peak boosts to trim voltage under load, or changing the ETVB offset or something like that. On July 25th of 2023, users on Intel's forum noticed a sudden change in boosting behavior and stability following a Windows update. Curiously, microcode can get pushed via Windows Update. We dug through a GitHub repository of Intel microcode changes and found an update in June of 2023, just before the glut of instability posts cropped up. Now, the errata for that month does not list anything relating to boosting explicitly, but this doesn't preclude the possibility. On September 7th, 2023, Extreme Tech published a story entitled Intel Found at Fault for Recent BSODs on Raptor Lake CPUs. This was before oxidation was even a tip in our inbox and before the excessive voltage was publicly known. Extreme Tech wrote, quote, "The investigation into a mysterious blue screen of death error on Intel 13th generation CPUs has now concluded, and it turns out the call was coming from inside the testing lab. Intel itself is apparently to blame for the recent spate of unsupported processor BSODs users have experienced and has pointed the finger at its own microcode. The company is now rolling out a fix for all users, and a BIOS update will be required to rid yourself of this meddlesome error permanently." Extreme Tech continued to say MSI quickly rolled out a fix for affected users, but then the issue appeared on both Gigabyte and Asus boards, indicating it was an Intel CPU problem and not a motherboard issue. The same article included a list of CPU IDs that were believed to be affected. Here's a highlighted table of that. Assuming the list's accuracy, this lists hybrid CPUs. Extreme Tech wrote, quote, "The crux of the issue is that microcode from Intel labeled 0x119 and 0x4119 for Raptor Lake CPUs rolled out in a Windows update in June 2023 and caused GDS_no flag issues for P and E cores. Users would see the error if they updated Windows. Intel responded to this report and wrote the following, quote, "Intel is aware of reports from end users of blue screen hands with error code unsupported processor when updating to August 2023 preview updates for Microsoft Windows 10 and 11 while using the latest BIOS updates from system manufacturers on 13th gen processors with performance hybrid architecture. Intel has worked with our ecosystem partners and identified an issue in recent microcode updates to system manufacturers which can cause this error code. As of September, Intel has released microcode updates to the affected processors to correct this issue." This issue appears to be unrelated to the current issues. What we take away from it, though, is that there were early warning signs that Intel had microcode riddled with problems on the same architecture which faces challenges today. Intel is demonstrating a pattern of microcode issues. In November of 2023, a user on Intel support forums replied to a thread about the out-of-video memory error on the 13900K, which was getting posted everywhere at this point, and that user said this, quote, "Why don't Intel just accept this is something wrong with the 13900K instead of following the SOP?" On December 23rd, 2023, Rad Game Tools posted an article entitled "Intel Processor Instability Causing OODLE Decompression Failures." They must have been really frustrated to post this on the 23rd of December. For those unfamiliar, OODLE is compression code commonly used in games. It's probably one of the most tested pieces of code in gaming history. OODLE is owned by Epic Games and has been around since 2012. Many games use this code for compression and decompression as well as their development studios, meaning that it is unlikely but still possible to exhibit major bugs. Rad Game Tools has changed this page with time. The original page was accessed with archive.org and stated this, quote, "Rad has become aware of a problem that can cause OODLE data decompression failures or crashes in games built with Unreal. We believe that this is a hardware problem which affects primarily Intel 13900K and 14900K processors, less likely 13700, 14700, and other related processors as well. Only a small fraction of these processors will exhibit this behavior. The problem seems to be caused by a combination of BIOS settings and the high clock rates and power usage of these processors, leading to system instability and unpredictable behavior under heavy load. As far as we can tell, there's not any software bug in OODLE or Unreal causing this." Critically, they noted that this can show up as a GPU error message like out-of-video memory errors, even though it's caused by the CPU. RAD went on to suggest some BIOS options, and then the page was updated April 22nd, 2024, jumping ahead a bit, and it now says this, quote, "Note, previous versions of this document recommended the Intel failsafe setting, but even though it's documented as setting Intel recommended settings, this does not appear to be the case." Clearly, there were calls to take responsibility last year, and Intel still hasn't properly done so. And it continues. On February 16, 2024, ASUS pushes microcode 0x123 in its Z790 Hero Beta BIOS update without comment on the instability. Intel also didn't comment. On February 27th, 2 full months after the RAD Game Tool's initial report, Intel posted its first public statement that we were aware of. Intel stated that it is aware of reports regarding issues and is talking to partners. April 6th, NVIDIA seemingly had enough of getting blamed for out-of-video memory errors. An NVIDIA employee posted this on their forums, quote, "If your system is using an Intel 13th or 14th gen unlocked desktop CPU and is experiencing stability issues or out-of-video memory error messages, or crash the desktop while the game is compiling shaders, please consult the following sites for troubleshooting assistance," before linking to RAD Game Tools and Intel. April 8th, ZDNet Korea reported, and we picked up the story in Hardware News, that Korean distributors saw a sudden increase in CPU replacement demands, noting that service centers were using Tekken 8 as a test. The publication noted that distributors and service centers said this, quote, "The number of customers visiting the customer center asking to change their 13th and 14th generation core processors has recently increased to more than 10 per day." The service center also claimed via translation that it was, quote, "suffering partial losses to replace customer CPUs." Intel responded to ZDNet with this, quote, "Intel is aware of problems that occur when executing certain tasks on 13th and 14th generation core processors for desktop PCs and is analyzing them with major affiliates." April 27th, Intel blamed the motherboards. It said, quote, "Intel has observed that this issue may be related to out-of-specification operating conditions resulting in sustained high voltage and frequency during periods of elevated heat. While the root cause has not yet been identified, Intel has observed the majority of reports of this issue are from users with unlocked or overclock-capable motherboards. Intel has observed 600-700 series chipset boards often set BIOS defaults to disable thermal and power delivery safeguards designed to limit processor exposure to sustained periods of high voltage and frequency. Intel requests system and motherboard manufacturers to provide end users with default BIOS profiles that match Intel's recommended settings." This is clear motherboard blame here. May 2nd, Intel posted its updated guidance, which further implicated motherboard partners by providing guidance on BIOS settings. June 14th, obtained by Igor's lab, Intel is said to have said this to its partners, quote, "Root cause is an incorrect value in a microcode algorithm associated with the ETVB feature. Increased frequency and corresponding voltage at high temperature may reduce processor reliability. They found it internally, they say, and it impacted platforms include Raptor Lake S and the refresh. Enhanced thermal velocity boost manipulates CPU turbo frequency based on thermal headroom and power budget," and the report claims that Intel said this, "Failure analysis of 13th and 14th generation KSQ processors indicates a shift in minimum operating voltage on affected processors resulting from cumulative exposure to elevated core voltages. Intel analysis has determined a confirmed contributing factor for this issue is elevated voltage input to the processor due to previous BIOS settings, which allow the processor to operate at turbo frequencies and voltages even while the processor is at a high temperature." Intel said that microcode version 0x125, quote, "includes an ETB fix for an issue which may allow the processor to enter a higher performance state even when the processor temperature has exceeded ETVB thresholds." Now, they called this a fix, which is significant phrasing. June 18th, Intel posted yet more guidance for its stability issues. We observed changes made as recently as July 25th to this post, where Intel silently tweaked some of the language. Intel quietly changed all the headers and phrasing of Intel recommendations to instead be Intel recommended default settings or Intel default settings. The phrase recommended default itself is nearly nonsensical, except it allows Intel to separate its responsibility by moving it to the board partners saying it's a recommended default, it's not a hard requirement. This is what Intel has been hiding behind for almost a decade now, and they finally reap what they sow. This entire post is a gigantic mess containing such confusion as its Intel default settings chart. Intel default settings only has clear definitions for the values at the top of the chart. Otherwise, the overarching chart title of Intel default settings, which clearly applies to everything below it, somehow manages to have multiple sets of settings for options which can only have one entered value. That is not a default, that is a set of options with wishy-washy commitments. The power delivery profiles offer 3 options sometimes, or sometimes 2, and sometimes baseline isn't one of them, but most of the time it is, and baseline isn't recommended. In fact, even though it's called baseline, baseline isn't the default. default, nor is Intel recommending it as the baseline. Actually, performance is recommended, but only under certain conditions. And extreme is recommended when it exists for the last KS SKUs, but only sometimes and only if supported by the VRM. And PL1 at 125 watts is the standard, but 253 watts is somehow recommended. Intel has chosen language that allows them to pretend that they're free of responsibility no matter what by avoiding an actual clear default like they've avoided since at least Skylake and since the media has been telling them about for almost a decade. So they can try and manipulatively blame their motherboard partners instead for not following what are unclear guidelines without laying out a hard spec and enforcing it, which is what they should be doing. Quote, Intel does not recommend baseline power delivery profiles unless required for compatibility, end quote. This doesn't even make sense. Intel's own language implies that baseline would be the baseline, but performance is the default, not baseline, and they don't use the word default to actually declare a default because they don't want to, because that would be bad for the performance. The performance PL1 and PL2 are the same as they have been, so in other words, nothing critical has changed, but Intel is acting like this is different. Simultaneously, Intel buried the actual lead in this post, where, in paragraph 3, it noted that it discovered a bug in the ETVB performance behaviors that related to boosting beyond temperature barriers. July 11th, Alderon Games says that Intel is selling defective 13th and 14th gen CPUs. The workload for Alderon's game server is similar to Minecraft game servers. This is something that Buildzoid talked about in one of his posts, where he noted that Minecraft servers degrade particularly quickly for the Intel CPUs. July 14th, Buildzoid posts a video titled The Intel Instability and Degradation Rant, where he theorizes that there's an issue with the RAIN bus. This is interesting because it matches some of those earliest complaints that we found previously, and this was before anyone had evidence of basically anything, and it was just total conjecture out on forums, but it lines up with what Buildzoid is saying, and now there's much more support for it. Buildzoid notes that all cores and the RAIN share a power rail, so when the P cores want high voltage, such as 1.5 volts with maximum clocks, it might be more than the RAIN can handle. July 22nd, Intel posted yet another statement. This one got updated on the 29th, and for some reason this one gets the disclosure of the update transparently, but some of the others don't. The post says, quote, Intel is currently targeting mid-August for patch release to partners following full validation. July 25th, Buildzoid probes the 0x125 microcode and finds that it has a 50 millivolt lower V-core for 6 GHz boost on his 14900K, but says, quote, however, 8-thread Cinebench still gets all the way up to 1.4 volts even at around 80C, which I don't really think is safe. I'm guessing Intel will probably lower voltages even more with the August update. Also, I'm not sure that every CPU will see a 50 millivolt voltage reduction. It's possible that voltage reduction from microcode 125 varies based on how high your CPU's VID table is, so bad CPUs might see more of a voltage reduction than good ones. July 29th, Intel updates its July 22nd post with a broken link for customer support going nowhere, demonstrating just how much Intel actually cares about its customers. Alderon Games added this: Intel CPUs have known defects in some 13th and 14th gen processors. This can sometimes cause permanent, irreversible damage to your processor in certain conditions. Epic Games posted this: we are aware of an issue where Fortnite crashes frequently on the i9-13900K KFKS or i9-14900K KFKS CPUs. Rad Game Tools has released info on how to resolve this issue. We're not sure what developer or game this one is for, but this error also popped up on Reddit. This isn't an Alderon error, contrary to earlier Tom's Hardware reports. It's a different game, but it states this, quote, this CPU has problems with modern Unreal Engine 5 games, which can result in crashes. So one last critical note for the timelines. We noticed that Intel has been silently changing some of its public statements after the media has already picked up those statements. So in a tab I had left open, for example, I noticed that Intel said something different in its Reddit post we already reported on. They said, quote, short answer, we can confirm there was a via oxidation manufacturing issue addressed back in 2023, but it is not related to the instability issue. The newest version of this page at the time of filming instead says this: short answer, we can confirm there was a via oxidation manufacturing issue addressed back in 2023 and that only a small number of instability reports can be connected to the manufacturing issue. So Intel went from not related to a small number being connected to it. This is gaslighting behavior. It's corpo deflection 101 strategies, we think, where Intel initially went from flat out denying any relationship of the via oxidation issue to the instability to then softening the language, which we think probably came from legal after that post was made. But now it's time to talk about Intel's statements both to The Verge and to us. This is before we halted communication with the company over this issue. It was, to take some of Intel's phrasing, back when we actually thought they might be trying to resolve the issue properly. So we had asked Intel if it would do literally anything to actually support users beyond the legal requirement of following their existing written warranty policy, and it answered with this. Quote, Intel's standard warranty policy remains in place. However, Intel is committed to making sure all customers who have or are currently experiencing instability symptoms on their 13th or 14th gen desktop processors are supported in the exchange process. This includes working with Intel's retail and channel customers to ensure end users are taken care of regarding instability symptoms with their Intel Core 13th and 14th gen desktop processors. For customers who are or who have been experiencing instability symptoms, Intel continues advising them to reach out to Intel customer support for further assistance. Additionally, if customers have experienced these instability symptoms on their 13th or 14th gen processors but had RMA requests rejected, we ask that they reach out to Intel customer support for further assistance and remediation. First of all, this doesn't answer the question at all, and it completely dances around it. Secondly, it is completely insane as an answer, because their answer, unironically, somehow, this is like what they actually said, is effectively file an RMA, and then if we screw you, file it again. And just keep doing that until you land on someone who has enough empathy or doesn't hate their job too much and they approve your RMA. That's crazy. To have to go through an RMA process once can already be a painful experience. It's very region specific. But to have to go through it multiple times and then have the company be like, yeah, we know there's at least 2 distinct specific issues, but you're still gonna have to just fight your way through. But don't worry, if they reject you, just try again and we'll eventually do something for you. So, I don't know, this is like, it's acting like it doesn't control its own RMA processes. This is ASUS. This is exactly what ASUS was doing. And we already know that Intel has rejected some warranty claims, and these date back to 2023 when presumably Intel knew of at least some of its instability issues, but the public didn't have any official commentary yet. So by its own admission, it at least knew of the oxidation issue, and it appears to have known about some of the other instability issues because of those microcode changes over time. So saying, quote, our policy remains in place is useless. Intel also said this, quote, incorrect voltages are one aspect of the reported instability issues. Intel is delivering a microcode patch which addresses exposure to elevated voltages, which is a key element of the instability issue. The via oxidation manufacturing issue and the instability issue are separate, Intel says. Intel confirms the via oxidation manufacturing issue affected some early Intel Core 13th gen processors. However, the issue was root caused and addressed with manufacturing improvements in screens in 2023, and Intel's analysis to date has determined that only a small number of instability reports on Intel Core 13 gen processors can be connected to the manufacturing issue. The lack of Intel pinpointing a date or a serial number range or date code range, that looks suspicious, and the reason it looks suspicious is because saying it was fixed in 2023, like we said in the last video, means nothing. That's 365.25 days in which they could have addressed it, and we don't know which one it was. So it looks suspicious, and the fact that they're saying early parts were affected, we don't know what that means. I did ask, this is before we cut contact, and they didn't answer, which is part of why we cut contact. Because like as soon as you start digging past the surface, they go back into their shell. Either way, some of this might also be related to, we went and looked back in time, Intel Sapphire Rapids shipment halts that it had last year. Either way, we asked Intel if the microcode would affect the performance, and it did not answer the question. Quote, the microcode update is currently under validation, including extensive performance evaluation. Intel will provide additional performance information when validation is complete. Actually, in fact, here's a list of questions that Intel ignored from us. Instead of reading them all to you, I'll just put them on the screen. You can make up your mind as to why they might answer some of these, but not all of them. Anything that required a concrete answer, like a date or serial range, was ignored. It was not only answered with a, we don't know, they ignored it. They didn't even answer the question, were 2022 CPUs affected, which should be the easiest question to answer, because if the statement early CPUs were affected is true, then the answer is yes. The reason I asked that question is because if it's not yes, then there's a problem with the other statement and it would undermine it, which is exactly why I asked it and maybe why they didn't answer it. And if that's not why, then I don't know. Intel didn't acknowledge a lot of these questions. It retroactively edited some of its public statements, which already looked bad last time we talked to them about omitting the oxidation comment from the statement on their official site. And one of Intel's large customers told us Intel became aggressive when it asked for a date range for affected parts, noting that Intel minimized their concerns they felt in an abrasive way. These are obviously opinions from a source. So every contact that we've spoken to is concerned about retaliation from Intel in one form or another. There are a lot of ways they could do this. There's the legal avenues for leaking. It seems unlikely that Intel would pursue those right now because there'd be so many of them and they'd have to identify people. But there are also the stuff that's more like subterfuge. So if you don't remember, Intel at one point was sued in court and lost because it was effectively subsidizing OEMs, Dell in particular, to basically avoid using AMD CPUs. Now, our suspicions were already raised, but Intel's subreddit has had a series of questionable actions on its own. There's enough of them where you have to question the motive of the entire process, or at least we do. That's how we approach everything we report on, and that's just, it's our flavor of reporting. So to me, Intel looks like it's trying to avoid any venue where it can be held accountable while there is an onslaught of people who are upset about a problem and seeking answers as simple as, yes, we will extend your support, and here's a range of things that might be affected, just so big clients don't waste their time trying to identify CPUs. We already talked in the beginning about how Intel silently deleted its own AMA a day after not showing up for it, and how a community moderator deleted Matt's comment. A user replied to this and pointed out that there were other off-topic comments in that very same thread, including one which read this, quote, "Listen, for the most part, nobody cares about the architecture. What we really want is for Intel to fuck AMD's shit up." The moderator replied to this demonstration of a double standard and stated, quote, "I would argue that is a stupid comment, but not quite rising to the level of removal. People are allowed to have bad opinions." They're allowed to have bad opinions of something totally unrelated to Lunar Lake, but apparently not allowed to have actual legitimate questions and asking for help while still referencing Lunar Lake in the announcement thread of delaying the Lunar Lake AMA. That's not okay. It's a clear bias. This particular moderator does not work for Intel. I don't know the moderator. As far as we can tell, this particular subreddit claims to be community run. Intel's official support account co-moderates the Intel Arc subreddit with the same moderator who deleted Matt's comment. And likewise, the Intel subreddit hosts links to Intel's official Discord server, and the subreddit is where Intel's own staff, including Intel's marketing staff and community manager, interact with community and perform AMAs. Its support staff also regularly engages here, and the subreddit has also pinned a set of links to Intel's Amazon page officially, and ironically, its warranty information. So we think the Intel subreddit is functionally indistinguishable from an official platform for Intel, and the actions taken there both by official Intel employees and by community moderators to us resemble the actions of a panicked damage control campaign. Let's get away from the quagmire of Reddit. We'll get into the Q&A from us and from The Verge with Intel. They were separately done. The answers were provided to both publications prior to The Verge publishing their story, which is relevant because it means that Intel chose in advance of publication to unify the answers. The Verge asked similar questions to us, like whether all CPUs were affected. Intel told us this, quote, "No, Intel Core 13th and 14th generation desktop processors with 65 watt or higher base power," which, by the way, that is already a change from some of the earlier messaging that focused on K SKUs. The quote continues, "including K, KF, KS, and 65 watt non-K variants could be affected by the elevated voltage issue. However, this does not mean the listed desktop processors are inevitably impacted by the issue." We'll put the statement to The Verge on the screen below ours. The only difference is the word inevitably, and Intel told The Verge that it will not issue a recall as a separate statement. The Verge asked Intel the same question that they danced around for us, which was whether Intel would engage in active outreach. Intel spun a few paragraphs of bullshit to basically say no, except without saying it. The Verge asked if Intel's fix will be preventative. Intel said this, quote, "It is possible the patch will provide some instability improvements to currently impacted processors. However, customers experiencing instability on their 13th or 14th generation desktop processor-based systems should contact Intel customer support for further assistance." Intel did not answer The Verge's questions about warranty extensions, although its answers to our question on the same topic were that they would stand by the existing warranty. And actually, in fact, Intel didn't answer The Verge's second question about RMAs either. So the company seemingly has no plan, or it's trying to limit its liability at the expense of customers. which is big corporate things to do. But as a consumer, you need to know about that and where their priorities are. The Verge also asked if Intel would update new CPUs before going to shelves. Intel said yes, that it wouldn't pull inventory back. We're a little confused by this because the main fix would be via microcode pushed through BIOS updates. So it's actually a motherboard problem, definitely. Maybe there's a CPU mask or something that they need to do as well. But on the motherboard side, the real issue is that all those boards sitting on shelves with older BIOSes, customers who don't know about any of this are going to be affected. And whether AMD intended to or not, its recent total clawback of its own inventory of an unlaunched product absolutely embarrasses Intel here. Now, The Verge asked about oxidized processors. Intel claimed it will, quote, fully support its businesses. The problem is that, one, this means nothing, and two, people don't know whether it's an oxidation issue or something else. If Intel wanted to actually support them, it'd tell them the failure ranges or most likely the affected dates. It could also give them snippets of code to run to try and identify possibly affected CPUs. More recently, Intel laptops have come under scrutiny for potential impacts as well. Note that laptop dies, the HX die is the same as the desktop die as far as we understand, and so it is very likely that it would be affected by all of the same problems, or at least some of them. We're not sure about the impact to the lower spec parts or the parts that are different silicon technically, but we have begun purchasing laptops from our viewers who note instability to us. Now, this piece has contained a lot of interpretation and a lot of opinions on Intel's actions, and we've been clear about that. We believe that Intel has demonstrated it cannot be trusted to be honest about this issue. It has been going on too long. Their statements have been inconsistent or changing at times, and we think some of the phrasing and some of the statements has been manipulative, and definitely in the statements about extension of warranties and properly helping people, they have been either defensive or non-existent, and none of this looks good. The company moves the goalposts, it changes who it blames, we think, and the trend is not something where we can charitably interpret anything related to this for Intel. So, for example, the original implications of K-SKU and OC boards being the problem candidates, that has moved consistently with the most recent data supporting 65 watts and up. If Intel doesn't know, that's fine. If their knowledge or their understanding changes of it, that's also fine. But be clear about it. Just say, we don't fucking know what the problem with our product is. We're trying to figure it out. In the meantime, here's what we're going to do. Auto-approve every RMA that says the word unstable or something like that. And if they think microcode will fix it, extend the warranty period from the date of that new microcode in case there is irreversible damage, which Intel's own answers imply there can be. Not just that, but being forthcoming with large customers and companies about the oxidation thing. Even if Intel is minimizing that, doesn't think it's a big deal, it obviously was a problem at some level, and they knew about it. But the partners didn't find out from the ones we spoke with until much later, and that is a problem. So Intel has engaged in actions that we believe are consistent with attempts to mislead or misrepresent. As a result, we informed Intel that we're banning it from participating in our investigations relating to this topic going forward, including our current objective analysis that we are running, which we'll look at some of the numbers. The company has cleared 5 out of our 10 criteria for ceasing contact on an issue. This all happened in the last couple weeks. These reasons include an immediate and time-sensitive risk to the consumer, including further degradation of the product, provable and objective fault, existing statements available to other outlets that we can comment on, a history of failure to resolve this issue, and what we believe to be our motive and opportunity to mislead or misrepresent. And the one thing that I'd like Intel's people to understand, if you'd stop being defensive for a second, is that what consumers and media are looking for is confidence. And the way to show confidence is to say, either we are confident it's fine, or we think there might be a problem, but we're confident that this policy with clear guidelines will resolve it or will at least take care of you beyond the existing warranty that you get from buying the processor. By the way, not every CPU gets 3-year warranty. A lot of them get 1-year warranties. So you look at different arrangements between large OEMs, server solutions, and tray purchases, and that is a really short window. So an extension is, in my opinion, absolutely necessary for affected processors because there's going to be a lot of CPUs that hit 1 year or are already past that and technically are outside of the "we'll stand by our policies" statement, which is bullshit. There are a few final things that just came out. First, Puget Systems, which sells pre-built computers, has published a write-up of its own experiences with Intel's failures. The post includes a chart with absolute values of units failed. The 11th gen had remarkably bad failure rates. The 12th and 10th generations look pretty reliable. 12th is actually remarkably good overall. And then the 13th gen has had a consistent string of failures over a long period of nearly 2 years now. The company has also observed what appear to be significantly higher field failure rates with Intel CPUs in general for the past year. The red line indicates CPUs that did not fail in Puget's own QA processes, which would be consistent with potential CPU degradation over time. These are alarming, as the latest submission shows that over 50% of Puget's CPU failures for that month were in the field. And before someone loses the nuance there, that was not 50% of CPUs sold, 50% of those that failed were in the field. So this is a small sample size, one that may indicate, however, ramping degradation. We know that Intel internally is referring to this as a, quote, big problem, which is actually a direct quote from someone at the company. And this makes that clear. Puget is actually extending its own warranty, which is great. That is exactly what everyone will unfortunately have to do if they're trying to do it right. But it also highlights the problem with Intel's newest PR stunt warranty extension. Tray CPUs will have to be separately warranted by extension from those who sold the parts. And unless Intel supports them too, you can bet that most won't do it unless they face separate pressure. And just because Intel is one of 3 major silicon manufacturers, or designers at least, that send products in for reviews to us, that doesn't change the fact of how we want to report on this situation. We have no trust in Intel right now. We are not willing to give the benefit of the doubt on anything related to this problem. And as stated previously, we currently cannot recommend any Intel CPUs in the 13th or 14th generation families. Perhaps when the microcode comes out and we can evaluate it, we will reconsider. However, until that time, we will not. And even when that time comes, I would need to see some firm, concrete commitments of what does it actually mean to help your customers, because there are already people who got fucked, and they are the ones who need concrete commitments. So we've got extensive testing on Intel's microcode underway right now. That'll be an objective analysis. This is your subjective analysis of what's going on at Intel. And thanks for watching. I am extremely disappointed in how this company has behaved. They were starting to turn things around for a little bit there with Alder Lake, and they have completely failed. So that's it for this one. If you want to support our reporting, you can go to store.gamersnexus.net and grab one of our brand new solder mats. We have red, green, yellow, and blue now. They're extremely heat resistant. They're great for soldering projects. They're great for model building, for anything where you have a mess you need to contain for the project and you want to easily be able to clean it afterward. Also holds screws and tracks them well for you. It has driver and tool holders, spool holders, and more. So grab that on the store to help fund us directly, as we stopped publishing everything for like a week so I could just focus on this piece. So that is what your purchases fund. Thank you for the support. Thanks for watching either way, and we'll see you all next time.